Hello, class. Just here to further, help you with your research paper. And I wanted to make another video, especially helping you kind of go through a journal article and go through the process of writing a research paper. As for some of you, this might be the first time you've done that, or it's been a while since you've done a research paper. Either way, like I said, it could be difficult, and it's only because you're not used to it. And research, unlike your other two papers, requires a different method of writing. In the sense that when you wrote your first two papers, you had an argument to make, right? Either that this ad was awesome, not awesome, doesn't matter, it's an argument, or that you wanted this thing for whatever reason, right, for your letter. However, for a research paper, you don't do that. You don't make up an argument first. You research first. That's the whole point, right? You familiarize yourself with the material. You read the information. You highlight your sources, your whatever you're reading or looking at, and then of course then you decide what you want to use in that paper. And then once you decide exactly what argument is being made with all your sources, then you create your own argument based on that research. And of course that research is going to support that main overall argument. That's how research works. So that's just kind of the steps here, and of course you can pause the video and read this to yourself. But what I really want to get to is how to kind of break down a research paper, especially if some of you haven't really done this a lot and are kind of looking at this for the first time, one of these pieces. And like I said, yes, they are pretty heavy, okay? But that's the challenge, like I mentioned in my previous video. That is what I want you to find, and that's why I only want you to do two. And unless you're really up for the challenge, I would really highly recommend for all your sources just to do two, and then research journal articles and three other sources of your choosing, a video, website, what have you. So here we have, of course, a journal article. Here's the abstract, and like I said, I'm going to assume that this is exactly what I wanted to read based off the abstract. Like I said in my previous video, if you read the abstract here, and if it doesn't really connect with what you're trying to argue or what you're really looking at, then ignore it, go on to the next journal article. You don't have the time to read every single article that you cross because, like, as you can see, they're heavy stuff. Having said that, remember that you're looking for your argument, okay? Don't dismiss something just because you think it's not relevant, or you're looking for sources that are directly related to the argument you're trying to make. That's not how research works either. Don't, for instance, say you were trying to argue that, you know what, guns are awesome. I want sources that support my idea that guns are awesome. That's just being a one-sided argument, right? You're just looking for things that support your argument. That's not how research works. That's why you're coming up with a question first and foremost, right? And in my case was like, well, is Facebook taking away our privacy? I don't know. I have no idea. I may have an opinion about it that I think they are, but I can't prove that. And I'm not looking for sources that prove that. I'm just looking for sources on research that I find, right? And so I just put Facebook and privacy, and let's see what I find. Maybe I find that no, Facebook isn't taking away our privacy. Now, granted, that's not true because it is. But in your case, maybe it happens that you find that what you believed is completely untrue, that the research says the opposite, and you have to come to terms with that. That's part of growing as a person, as growing as a scholar, a researcher, okay? So anyways, back to this. You are reading this, and one thing I'm going to let you know. First, what I want to do once you get a journal article, just read through all of it. Just get through all of it as much as possible, and I zoomed in a little bit so we can see. Let's just zoom out a little bit, yeah, that way we can see the full extent here. But yeah, read through it as much as possible. Do your best, and just read through it all the way, okay? As you're reading through it, if there's any particular spots that you find that are interesting, highlight those spots, right? Things that you may want to use in your paper because maybe you want to quote it or paraphrase it, kind of like what I've done here already, right? There's usually a highlight tool, right? Like that, a simple one, like so. Use that. That'll be really useful because the last thing you want to do is struggle to look for that spot that you know is there, but you don't quite know exactly where it is. and it's just a pain in the butt, right? Because and you don't really want to do that, especially once you're really starting to write and you just need that quote that you like remembered from the journal article, but you can't find it. This is a great way of making sure avoid that. There's other ways also to mark up the paper, and again, it's going to depend, of course, on your Adobe or whatever you have to read these. But for the most part, there should be some tools. Here I have like a little comment tool. There's sometimes a little comment bubble or something. This is what I have here on my laptop. I was able to do it before. Is it this one? No, that's just the text. Can I merge it here? Well, that just creates a box. Yay. Okay. Can I delete it now? All right, how about if I do this? All right. Okay, I want this guy, and I want him over here. Here? Well, there's this guy, and this guy, I guess, creates little circles here, and like, ooh, look at this spot, for sure. Evens them out, that's nice. But there is, I thought, oh, here we go. So for me, it was here. Whatever. So here, if you want to make a little note for yourself, like I said, sometimes it looks like a little comment icon. It's the same thing, and then like, this is good stuff. There. Something like that, right? So maybe to just remind you that, look at this area right here, or whatever kind of comment you want to put. Whatever the case, right? I'm just, whatever you want to do, whatever's easiest for you, probably just highlighting the thing, right? But there's more, and whatever kind of, writer or reader you are, you may want to just look at that. And what's nice about it, it keeps track of those over here. So that's really nice, especially if you're like, oh, later on, I'm like, oh man, where is that spot? And you can just quickly look, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's the big circle I made. Anyways, just some tips there to help you kind of go through these. Like I said, they're very dense, but here's what you really should focus on. Once you read through it and kind of take notes here and there, you really want to look at the introduction. The introduction usually explains why they're doing this research. What's the issue here? What is the argument, right? You want to know that because you want to bring that into your own paper. You explain that this research paper was done in the first place because they want to look about issues of privacy, right? Or whatever it is that your paper is talking about, right? After that, they usually keep talking about more of why they're doing this research. And right here, they're citing everybody else that has done similar research before to back up why this is an important thing to do. All these citations you see here that I'm kind of highlighting with the circle, because I might as well, these are all other sources, other journal articles. This is what makes it so credible. As such, they're just letting you know that, hey, we did our homework, we know what's going on, this is what's been done before, and this is how we're going to add to it, right? And so now they usually get into their study, whatever study they have. So they start talking about the study. Here's the exact things they do with the study. So the numbers, the statistics, who they looked at. Maybe they did whatchamacallit. Oh, geez. I don't know, I'm drawing a blank. But like a survey, right? Or an interview. And so they're telling you, well, we had like this many participants and whatever. In this case, let's see, they say, yeah, they had participants here. Complete an adapted version of this person's study and 18 blogging privacy management measures. So they did some kind of questionnaire almost, right? And then they try to analyze what they said, and then here's the analysis, and then they had results. So after all of the experiment, basically, here's what are the results of that. And usually you get a bunch of big numbers, and if we zoom in here a little bit, you'll see that. Like, this is the results we got. R equals that. I would not, I wouldn't be too stressed out. If you don't understand that, that's fine. I would have to really look into it and see the table to really understand it myself. I can't just at glance know what they're talking about. Really, just look at what that means. And that's usually they tell you right here. In the final step, both blah, 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 blah. And if we zoom out again here, the discussion really is right here. Is breaking down all this stuff they're talking about here. So if we go to the discussion, that's where you really want to pay attention, because that's where they tell you how their findings are important. And that's what you want to know and use in your paper. Because you could say, whoever the authors of these paper, Child and Starcher found through their experiment in which they looked at however many people, found that privacy was being taken in this manner, right? And of course, I'm just making it up. I haven't read this article as of yet, but you get the gist. This last page here, before they get to the references, is usually the richest part, and it tells you exactly the argument, and it tells you exactly what they found and why it's important to this subject. And that's what you're probably going to want to use the most and highlight the most right here, right? Whatever case like this. I like how it kind of tries to make a circle with my terrible drawing skills there. So that is how I would recommend you look at this research paper, okay? You have 2 of them to do. Like I said, take your time, read them carefully, highlight stuff, and really look at the introduction and especially the discussions. That is what's going to be the most useful to you, and not only in this class, but in any class that asks for research papers as sources. And like I said, these are the best types of sources you could ever use in your paper, as long as you are able to use them and understand them and know how they work, because you don't want to use a source and not actually get what they were trying to say. It happens a lot sometimes, is that they find your articles, you don't quite understand what the point was, you just make your own interpretation of that point, of that data, and you totally skew what the actual argument was. Be careful. That's what you're trying to avoid here. Because if you do that, it's not really going to help your point. You want to find out exactly what they're talking about and how it's related to your argument. Okay, so that's what you should do for your research papers. For your journal articles, your peer-reviewed journal articles. Again, you need 2 of these. Let me know if you have any questions or trouble finding these, but this shouldn't be too bad, especially if you follow my previous video on how to find them. Going back to the PowerPoint real quick, let us finish this up on how to write an actual research paper. And this is a good video to see, especially if you're having trouble just starting. Although, like I said, you should have your annotated bibliography right next to you as you start writing your research paper, as it'll keep you focused, especially with your research question, because that research question, most likely than not, will become your thesis or your argument. Regardless, as always, when it comes to any kind of paper, you have an introduction, right? No big deal. I don't think any of you will have too much trouble with this introduction, as you've been doing this for your previous 2 papers, and they've been great. So, just like always, you're trying to grab the attention of your reader, trying to grab their interest. In this case, you may want a brief discussion or explanation of the topic, so especially if it's historically important, you might want to give a history of it, but you don't want to go too much into that. You don't want to, so say you were doing like electric cars versus gas-powered cars or combustion engine cars, right? I don't want the history of the T model car. Okay, I don't care. You may mention that cars, were made in the early I forget when they were, like early 1900s or whatever. But it's a mention. You don't need to go all the way that far back. All right. When I mean history, I mean like maybe in the past 10 years, right? Maybe because that's really important to you. But you do not need to go back to whenever this technology you're looking at was first created. Okay. But yeah, you're just trying to set up the theme here. You're trying to set up the scene, the idea of that, why this is an important thing to research and this is an important thing to argue about, right? Then, of course, have your thesis statement, which is clearly stating your argument, your opinion, your point of view. And if it doesn't, you have a report, which is what I do not want. I do not want you to report on electric cars, okay? I want you to argue about electric cars. So it should be an argument, okay? And of course, it can be in your introduction. The thing about the introduction in the research papers, though, is that it can completely be more than one paragraph. I mean, look at this right here, okay? This right here is what most people would think right here is an introduction, right? This first paragraph. But actually, all of this part right here is the introduction. So, if you need to go through the history of something, that's great. Do so. Go through all of it. And if it's longer than a paragraph, totally fine. As long as your thesis is clear and I can totally tell it's your thesis and it's your argument, you're fine. Then, of course, you have your body paragraphs. And by body paragraphs, I guess that's not really a good way to put it, because I don't mean like each of these topics here, subtopics, or or points that support your main thesis isn't a paragraph per se. It's just a topic. And for instance, this first topic here can be like 2 pages alone. Same thing with topic 2. And maybe topic 3 isn't as strong, so there's only 3 or 4 paragraphs, right? So the idea is that these topics are the main support for your thesis or your main argument. As such, they can be as long as they need to be. Remember, we're breaking away from that 5-paragraph mold. That's not really what we're doing anymore. I should really change this to body, not body paragraphs, but body points is a better way to put it. And honestly, you know what? To make my point clear, let's do that. I don't know why. Ooh, but it's going to be points. Yeah, that's better. I'm going to save that so I don't forget. That's a better way to put it. Because these are not paragraphs. Let me make that clear. And you can kind of see this going on here. So here's their first point, right? And look how long that first point is. And then here's another point. And that's the whole idea when it comes to research. You're not writing little paragraphs and then that's it. Here's my first point, and here's a paragraph. Here's my second point, here's my second paragraph. No. These points can be as long as they need to be, especially since they're very important in supporting your argument. And of course, each of these points has to have evidence, which is your journal articles and your 3 other sources that you're finding for this paper. And they're scattered throughout. And that's the thing about writing a research paper is that don't, especially for these journal articles, don't just use them once and call it good. Use them multiple times. Especially something like this. This is rich in support. Use this throughout your paper, especially your journal articles. And you may find the same for your other sources. But these guys should be cited way more than once. Probably at least 3 times each. I don't know why he doesn't want to go into the other one, but it's fine. And of course, after all that, conclusion, right? You rephrase your thesis, which is your argument. You briefly discuss the main points you made here. And then you give the big picture, which might be something along the lines of more research is to be done, which is perfectly acceptable. You'll notice that a lot of journal articles like this one probably has the same thing going on. If it would go to this, I bet you it says more research needs to be done or further looked at. Let's see. Usually at the end here. It says CMPM theory continues to serve useful as a theoretical framework in advancing nuanced understanding of social media interaction, disclosure, privacy management practice in the digital age of communication. More likely than not, it's probably saying that, yeah, more research needs to be done. Just a nice way of doing it. Anyways, so that's just like the quick and I guess quick way of just telling you how to do that. But let's go into more gritty detail, right? Because that's really what you're going to need. So step 1, which you already should be done with by this process, but I'm just going to go over the whole thing just in case you need a quick refresher or whatever. So step 1, choose your topic, right? You already should have done this, especially since you had 2 activities related to this, but choose a topic and then just Google it, right? That's it. I have Bing, if you use that for whatever reason, or Yahoo, but the idea is to just Google it, right? Familiar yourself with the topic. Look into what it's about. The idea is to just get your feet wet, understand what's going on, what are the discussions going around in your research, and what exactly you're going to want to argue about your topic. Because you're not just going to argue about electric cars, for instance, right? You're going to argue about a specific thing about them, right? You don't want to pick something like computers and say computers are great. That's way too broad, right? You want to pick something and narrow down, and that's kind of what you're doing in step 1. So step 2, gather sources in the library. By that I mean gather journal articles. After you found kind of a general idea, you want to find more specific, narrow sources. And again, you need 2 sources from the library website, from our library website. But begin at gathering some sources there. Read and highlight. That's kind of what I've been telling you in this video. Highlight your sources. Be aware that all information is connected to not all information is connected to your specific topic. That's the idea. You're trying to connect all this information together. Do not, of course, I find this happens with some students. Don't highlight everything. If you highlight everything, you highlighted nothing. Highlight the stuff that's important, but not everything. If you make a bunch of notes, it's not going to help you a lot. The ultimate goal is to connect everything, and that's synthesis, and that's something you read in chapter 5. And I'll actually go over synthesis in a later lecture, but that's what you're trying to do in that area. Connect everything together to support whatever argument you come up based off the research you found. Develop a thesis statement. Of course, that will be what you develop based off your research question. So if your research question was something along the lines of, are electric cars better than gas-powered cars? Or vice versa? Well, after doing all the research, you found, you know what? Based on all the research, I found that even though electric cars have great potential, right now we just do not have the infrastructure for electric cars. As such, gas-powered cars gas-powered cars are still the best cars to invest in. And that is your argument, right? Whatever. Remember, a thesis statement is very important, especially when it comes to a research paper. So you want to make sure it's as easy as you can make it, that it stands out to your reader. Highly recommend you develop an outline at this point, and you will be developing an outline, as that's one of the requirements this week and one of the things that you will do. Still, in other classes, whenever you do a research paper, especially if you have a tough time developing or writing one, an outline really will help you out, as it'll keep you on task and let you know exactly what things you mentioned, what things you need to mention, and what things you need to support in more detail. After that, of course, cite correctly, and this could be one of the last things you do, but it's still a very important part of a research paper, because a research paper is so logical, more so than the other two papers, and a lot of your ethos is based on how well you're citing. Check your citations. Whenever you see a specific quote, whenever you paraphrase anything, make sure you cite. And you do want to cite because you want to show that you've done your homework and you're citing very important sources. Step 7, use a variety of lead-ups. By that I mean try to use different types of leading into your sources. Here I have 3 different ways to do that. By all means, copy the format of how you do that, especially if you're just used to just doing one. This is a great way for you to kind of develop further as a writer, to go past the boundaries that you have set for yourself. There's way more lead-ins in this, but I'm just kind of giving you a sample, right? You don't always just want to say, here is Smith, and this is what he said, quote. And then here is Baker, and this is what he said, quote, right? It just seems very, I guess, basic would be a good way to put it, but like an amateur, like it's the first time, and you want to go beyond that. And here's a good way. So according to Smith, 54, the presence of television, yada, yada, yada. By the early 1960s, quote, Bishop and Marx, television programs and commercials reinforced rigid gender roles and promised consumers material wealth if they could fit that roles. One social critique from the era remarked that television certainly nurtured both consumerism and conformity. Cole 74. And look how they did this one. They just integrated into the sentence without even punctuation needed, like this first example. That's great. Okay. The idea is that anything you quote or anything you paraphrase, you just cite. Give these a look. All right. Pause this section here and see what you come up with. Of course, don't just always quote your papers. Actually, here's what I'm going to say for this. Quote something when you need to quote it. Like the way they put something is so perfect, it's so great, fine, quote it. If it's not, then paraphrase it or summarize. Okay? That's the best way to use your sources. Paraphrasing and summarizing shows that you read it, you digested it, right? And then you used it in your work, in your own words, while giving them credit. And that shows that you've done a lot of work. You thought about it. While quoting seems the laziest way of bringing someone else's work. Because you expect the quote to do the work for you. And that's the thing you want to try to avoid. Don't just quote something like this and expect it to explain your point, because it doesn't. You have to set up that quote if you're going to use it that way. You have to explain exactly what argument you're making before you use the quote. The quote is just there to support that argument, not the other way around. As such, do not quote directly unless you need to, unless there's no other way, because that person put it in the perfect way. Paraphrasing, summarizing is a way better way to do it. And I just have here some examples of that, or not examples, but what those are exactly if you're still kind of not familiar. Although by this point, I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with how to quote, how to paraphrase, and how to summarize something. And of course, step 8, write the paper. Easy, right? Easy peasy. That's the idea, is to kind of get you started, right? And that's why I give you all these tools, and that's why I'm separating the paper in this manner for our class, because you need because if you just start, it's very tough, and I understand that. That's why we separated the paper in this way for this module. But at the end of the day, eventually you will have to start writing the paper. Now, hopefully this will help. This PowerPoint will help. Of course, ask me any questions if you have any trouble. That's what I'm here for, and I'm always answering as fast as I can. But the last thing, of course, is plagiarism that I wanted to mention. This one is the most, I guess this assignment is the most tempting when it comes to plagiarism. And like I said, plagiarism is just you taking your somebody else's work that's clearly not yours and passing it off as your own, either because you don't know what you're doing, or you're lazy, or you don't care enough. Either way, it's pretty easy to catch. I've been reading your writing. I've been reading your even though I haven't been able to respond, I have been able to read all of your work that you've put in for your discussions. I know how you write. I know your guys' voice. Even if you do sound more professional, I know it's coming from you. So for one, once I read it, I know. And if I find that you're plagiarizing anything, there will be severe consequences. Potentially, you'll just get an F in the class and be reported to the Dean of Students. So please don't even think about it. You'll notice that a lot of your assignments have a little color right next to them under your grades. That's just Turnitin software that just checks for plagiarism in the first place. If for some reason, like I said, it doesn't catch it, I'll usually find it myself. And you can see that the color represents how much things are plagiarized. So it's blue and green, no big deal. Yellow is kind of a worry, and red, there seems to be a problem for sure. And that kind of gives me a hint there that I need to really look at this carefully. So again, don't chance it. If you're ever worried about if they're plagiarizing something, no worries. Just come and email me. I'll let you know how to fix it or how to make sure. I mean, you guys are learning. Technically, incorrect citation is plagiarism, but I'm not really worried about that. I'm only worried about grabbing something from the web, copying and pasting over here without giving it credit, or just copying chunks. Just be aware of this, okay? All right, this video is long enough. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, good luck on your writing this paper. Let me know if there's any way I can help in any other manner. I think there'll be one more video, I'm pretty sure, on synthesis that'll help you connect your sources together and figure out how to do that. For now, we'll call it good, and I'll see you in the next video, all right? Okay.